Day 162 to 11:42 a.m. Infirmary. Military encampment. New Infanta settlement. Infanta, province of Quezon. The military lost all its high-ranking officers but two. Major Bautista was absent from the settlement. It was only General Faustino who was holding up the military from collapsing thoroughly. And he was severely injured. Without a concrete foundation, the military would slowly collapse. It would already be good if that was all. However, it was very likely that the people lurking in the dark would hold power with what remained, putting everyone's safety to risk. That was why even if General Faustino was not in shape to lead at all, he was still doing so, using Jones as his hands and feet. It was not like there were no capable people left within the ranks of the soldiers. Nonetheless, being in the position of leading a group and being one of the settlement's pillars could not be based on a soldier's rank alone. They needed experience was a very crucial aspect for a person to lead people. It was one reason why only those who aged enough were in those positions. In the current situation, it would be hard to just pick anyone from the remaining soldiers and promote them. After all, a soldier's rank was earned and not just given abruptly. Giving a soldier a rank unbefitting would cause more trouble as it would plant discord among the soldiers. Still, Major Bautista returning alive would cause the situation to turn for the better. It would be hard to lead the soldiers with nothing but a disabled general and his proxy. At this time, General Faustino turned to Mark. Looks like you're managed to fulfill your end of the deal, bringing Alfonso back completely fine, despite what happened in the world. How about Sherville and the others? General Faustino asked. They are fine. Sherville is busy studying new things in the base. The others are also enjoying their stay. Mark replied, causing those that heard his words to stare at him. After all, he said that they were enjoying their stay. Who would enjoy what in this world at its current state? Major Bautista could only smile bitterly. Mark was not joking. After all, Joash and the others were indeed enjoying their stay there. There were many new things that they had not seen in Mark's base and a few facilities unavailable in the settlement. Especially a bathhouse. Looking at it, every soldier here did not seem to have any proper bath for a long time. However, Mark's group, even Major Bautista, looked neat and clean. Even his uniform was washed properly. Ahem. General Faustino coughed a bit, making those staring look away. It is good then. But it looks like it's only Alfonso who you brought back. It's not easy to go here, you know, Mark replied. The amount of radiation in the surroundings is not safe for travel. Although I have methods that I used to go here, that can only be used on a small number of people. Or did you not know? Of course we knew. General Faustino said. Although we haven't known yet why the area around the settlement seemed to be protected. It was as if we are covered by a barrier we cannot see. Mark shrugged to the general's words. He was right, but not just anyone would be able to sense this barrier. The only indication of the barrier was the difference in the state of the land inside and outside. Inside the barrier, everything remained the same as before. It might already be destroyed, but the farmlands, landmarks, and even other landforms remained the same. Outside the barrier, however, everything was changed. It looked like a world alien for everyone in the settlement. There was no need to see the actual barrier as the border could easily be seen. Mark kept his silence at what the general said, which made Major Bautista sigh inside. Noticing that Mark did not seem to want to talk too much and appeared to be in a bad mood for a long conversation, he diverted the topic. Actually, Mark, we need your help with something. General Faustino said. What is it? Mark asked. I'm willing to hear, but it doesn't mean I'll agree to it right away. We know. The general nodded. Though I'm quite confided that you will also be interested. Then, General Faustino turned to Jones' galley and nodded. A group of people. Well, I don't know if we can call them people, really. Jones stated. They arrived the other day. But they were speaking a language none of us knew. They set camp inside the safe area. We don't want to just chase them away since they seem to have strange abilities and didn't seem to intend to bring any harm. But the people were being too wary of them. Jones explained. As the general stated, Mark would be interested in this. Strange people. So, what do you guys want me to do with them? Chase them away? No, it's not that. General Faustino replied. We just want to know their intentions. They did not do anything aggressive to us so far. We actually suspect that they also helped us when some robots appeared outside the safe area. Wait, did you already know about those robots? In any case, we just want to converse with them. I don't really know if you can help us with this, but I feel that you could do something. Well, let me see them first. Mark shrugged. Although I can't just promise that I will be able to do something. That is enough. General Faustino replied with a grateful tone before turning to Jones. Bring Mark to where those people are staying. Okay. General. Jones nodded. Follow me. As Jones began to take the lead, Mark turned to Major Bautista and the others.
You're going to stay here, right, Major? Mark then turned to Colleen. How about you? Why are you only asking me? Colleen grumbled. Your father will stay behind. Spera and Carla will surely come with me. So you're the only one to ask. Mark explained. Of course, I'm going. Colleen exclaimed as she went to push Mark to follow Jones. Soon, it was only General Faustino and Major Bautista who were present, along with the injured soldiers and medical workers in the infirmary. Your daughter is the same as ever, huh? General Faustino said with a smile. It is a good thing. If not for the side effect of the experiment, she could stay here without problems. It's just the people were afraid that she would just lose control and began to kill. Actually, General. Major Bautista spoke hesitatingly. My daughter is cured, although I doubt she would want to go back here anymore. Really? How? Surely, that statement was a surprise to the general? Yes. Major Bautista nodded. Although they did not want to explain how. In any case, we already knew that my daughter's condition before was similar to bipolarity, having two personalities. I was just that the other personality was created due to mutagen. General Faustino nodded. It was no secret to them what happened to Colleen. What I know is that they just removed the other personality, that new consciousness, from her. Major Bautista then took a breath in. That girl with violet hair with Mark. She seemed to be that consciousness they removed from my daughter. General Faustino was speechless. It was not wrong to say that what the major said was unbelievable. Are you sure? The general asked. I know that Mark seemed to have a lot of strange things with him, but it's still hard to believe. I know, General. Major Bautista shrugged. But with how their personalities were similar, they even had the same mutator abilities. Not to mention that when Colleen was younger, she looked exactly like that girl, Carla. It might be unbelievable, but it's hard to argue with the evidence. General Faustino fell silent. It was surely unbelievable but undisputable with the evidence present. Mark was really someone unfathomable. The general then turned to the major once more, this time with a serious look on his face. Tell me, did Mark knew about what is currently happening in the world? Major Bautista could not help but sigh at that question. What made you think that, General? His sudden arrival that day. Taking you, Sherville, and even Amika's family with him. Both Colleen and Amika had a tight connection with Mark, which made me think that he did it for them. To ensure your safety. It is too much of a coincidence that all these catastrophes happened after Mark took you and the others. Jones had a few deep wounds, braving the falling space debris to save me. Everyone in the settlement had at least a few bruises, rolling on the ground because of the earthquake. Then, you came back here, not a single scratch on your body. Not only you but everyone with you and Mark. With the intensity of the disaster a few days ago, it is impossible to achieve unless Mark prepared for it. Major Bautista could only shrug. Who would have thought that just being uninjured would give such clues? The general was not wrong. If someone fell badly, they could use their hands and arms to protect them from their fall. In that case, falling from an earthquake higher than magnitude 10 would definitely cause bruises and scratches on hands and arms. Well, unless the person was a dunce, then the injury would be on their face. There was no need to mention that the disaster came with most of the world unaware. One disaster came from the sky. Another turned the land upside down. Unless it was luck, no people would go unscathed. Even more for a whole group of people. I don't know if I should be saying this. Major Bautista hesitated. I'll just apologize later. There is no need to apologize. I'll take the blame. General Faustino shook his head. In any case, if you are saying that. Yes. Major Bautista nodded. Mark knew everything. Not just the disasters. Even the barrier and the Mechaids. Mechaids? It is those robots you mentioned earlier. Major Bautista answered the question. They seem to be robots from an artificial planet in space. And what is causing them to attack seems to be another pathogen similar to Mutagen. What? Surely, that piece of information was a surprise to the general. They were speaking in whispers until now. That exclamation from the general took everyone's attention. General, is everything all right? A doctor came immediately and asked the general. No, I'm fine. I'm just surprised about something. The general replied to the doctor. It's good then. The doctor replied. Don't force yourself too much. You're still recovering. You too, Major. I know you just returned, but don't strain the general too much. With those warnings, the doctor left to tend to other soldiers. That guy is really diligent, Major Bautista said, looking at the doctor's back. Dr. Jeremy? He really does. General Faustino nodded. Then, the general went back to whispers. Is what you said just now true? Sorry, General. I don't really know. Major Bautista shook his head. In the least, that is what Mark told everyone in his base. Tell me everything. General Faustino asked in all seriousness. I will sincerely apologize to Mark later. I know this might count it as us betraying his trust, but there is no way I will ignore this if it is for the sake of everyone's survival. Major Bautista suddenly fell silent. Then, a thought came to his mind. No, General. He might have already considered this to happen. What do you mean? General Faustino was bewildered. Since the start, Mark never told me that I can't tell anything I learned from him to anyone. Then, Major Bautista added. And he actually allowed me to stay here without me asking to. He likely knew that I will be asked about things, but he did not do anything to prevent it. This made the two silent for a bit, wondering what Mark really was. Day 162 to 12:11 p.m. Outskirts, New Infanta Settlement, Infanta, Province of Quezon. Leaving the infirmary, Jones guided the rest of the group towards the southwestern outskirts of the settlement. Are you sure leaving Dad there together with the general? Colleen slightly whispered to Mark as they stepped out of the military encampment. I'm pretty sure that Dad won't be able to refuse if General Faustino asked him about your place. She added. Yeah, I already expected that would happen. Mark answered nonchalantly. But, Colleen was confused. Didn't you declare before that no one should disclose details about the base outside? You gave that rule yourself. That's why I never actually mentioned anything about the base to Dad before we brought him there. Of course, it was reasonable for Colleen to become confused with Mark's nonchalant attitude. After all, he strictly declared those rules himself in front of everyone. She did not want that if something bad happened due to leakage of information, her father would be the one to take the blame. I did give those rules. Mark shrugged. But all that is way before we even knew about the second wave or the fusion of dimensions. At that time, there is still a high possibility of those things happening. Now, the situation is different. Don't even mention spreading the information. Just leaving or reaching the base without being able to fly is near impossible. The route in the sky is not exactly safe either. Even if the information leaked and someone wanted to bring us harm, they might even die before they reach the foot of the mountain. There was also the widened Agos River. The strong current isn't safe for boat travel either. Mark's words made Colleen think. Sure enough, he was basically right. Before, Even if it was slim, there was a possibility for people to climb up the mountain and find the location of the mountain base. It actually happened thrice. First was Huey's group, fleeing from an evolved tiger. The second time was the group of survivors that camped outside the base. Lastly was the tribe led by the old oracle. Now, there were various threats that would stop people from finding the base. The infected, evolved animals, mechids, and even the change in terrain alone was more than enough to stop people. In that case, Mark's rules from before did not matter much anymore. It was also unlikely for anyone to betray the base and leave now, considering it was the only safest place they knew. Colleen would admit it, and even her father would do the same. If they were to choose where to live at this moment, Mark's base was an indisputable choice. Not only that the base was intact, but it also had enough supplies to last them a long time. One obvious problem in New Infanta settlement right now was food and water. The mountain base did not have those problems currently. Soon, they left the tent city and stepped onto the outskirts of the settlement. Looking around, it seemed that compared to the mountain base, the area covered by the barrier in this settlement was far wider. It was not surprising considering the great difference between a few hundred people base and a few thousand people settlement. It seemed that everything, including the farming areas, was considered as part of the settlement. Those areas were included within the barrier, although there was nothing left of the crops. Now, depressed farmers could be seen slowly working on the farmlands from zero. Unexpectedly, the farming areas in the southeast were devoid of humans. Instead, there was a small group of makeshift houses made of scrap wood and gigantic leaves. It was surrounded by a palisade made of cut wood and vines. It must be the group of people mentioned by General Faustino. That's the place. Jones pointed out the small encampment. The people there were weird, and they speak a language that none of us can understand. That is why the farmers want to farm near them. They seem peaceful and did help around against the infected and those robots. They also don't try to proactively interact with us, so we just decided to leave them alone. It was still quite a distance away from where Mark's group was walking. The encampment was literally at the edge of the barrier. It indicated their lack of intention to interact with the people of the settlement. But before Mark's group could get close, "Put me down. Do you know WHOIAM? I can get you all killed?" A loud outcry of a male could be heard from the encampment. Mark's group could hear the yelling loudly, and that definitely did not sound like someone with an unknown language. *T. Jones cursed. That bastard really did it. Colleen's expression also looked strange. She seemed to be familiar with that voice. Soon after hearing that voice, several figures walked out of the encampment, carrying 3 men. 2 of the 3 seemed to be unconscious, while the one yelling out loud was trying to break free from the person carrying him. Bam! 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 The 3 were thrown out like dirty kittens, rolling on the ground. The people that carried them out went back to the encampment without a single word and closed the gates of the palisade. FCKU. You bastards. Let's see how long you all can FCKING stay here. The man then stood up, patting the dirt off his body, when he noticed Mark's group watching from afar. FCK. He cursed one last time as he left, half running away. The man did not even bother picking up the 2 unconscious men and left them lying on the ground. Mark did not bother looking at the escaping man at all. On the other hand, Jones and Colleen shook their heads. "Who is that troublesome person?" Spera asked Colleen, seeing their reactions. "I'm not really that familiar with him," Colleen replied. "All I know is that he's called Jackson. A son of a congressman. He had always been competing with Joish about many things. We had a few interactions before, and he's an extremely annoying person." "What a stupid idiot," Jones grumbled, feeling the headache that might come in the future because of that scene. Just what are they trying to achieve by doing this? A son of a politician and one of the most influential people in the settlement. They had been trying to gather forces for a while now. Those politicians likely heard about the prowess of that group of strange people and wanted to rope them in. However, there was no need to mention enticing them. They had to overcome the language barrier first. It was very likely that Jackson tried to communicate but failed and instead stormed into the encampment and resorted to threats. What a foolish bastard. Don't bother about unnecessary things, Mark spoke, hearing the conversations behind him. We're here for a different reason. Mark took the lead and approached the encampment. He even ignored the two unconscious men lying on the ground and made a knock on the gates, loud enough for anyone inside to hear. The people inside the encampment were in a rather bad mood. It was clear who the reason was. As such, a guard of the encampment abruptly opened the door and yelled at Mark while pointing a spear at him. The spear was directly below Mark's neck, and a short jab would pierce him on his throat. Even without understanding the language, the action and the spear were more than enough to tell what the person was yelling. But Mark was unfazed. He even slapped the spear away from his neck. I don't like being threatened like this, Mark spoke. I'm here to talk, so don't make me turn this into a slaughter. Mark spoke, but Jones and Colleen had question marks on their faces. Spera seemed to be a bit interested, while Carla was just as clueless as ever. On the other hand, the guard whose spear was slapped away was stunned. You can speak our language? The guard exclaimed. Of course, it was only Mark and Spera who understood it. Yeah, I can. Mark stared. So, can you lower your spear now? The guard was in surprise, and he was still in a stance that was ready to stab his spear at any time. However, it seemed that Mark being able to speak their language was far more important than his anger that he nodded and pointed the spear down immediately. Are you not with those humans? The guard asked and pointed at the unconscious men on the ground behind Mark's group. I'm not. Mark stared at the guard. I guess it's obvious. That was true. If Mark's group was with the idiot earlier, they would have come together. I want to talk with your leader. Can we enter? Mark told the guard. At this time, several more guards arrived, looking at Mark like a display in a museum. So far, they never encountered anyone that could converse with them from this human settlement. It was clear why they were both wary and interested. Mark's inquiry, however, met some hesitation. After all, Mark was a stranger. It was reasonable for them to be cautious. But then, a wave of energy was felt by everyone. Let them in. A voice of a woman echoed inside everyone's ears. The voice was soothing like a gentle wave by the shore. Without question, the guards opened a path for Mark's group to pass through. The same guard that pointed a spear at Mark took charge to lead them. Amazing. Jones murmured as he tapped Mark's shoulder. The general was right for informing you about these people. But what language are you speaking with? Jones and Colleen sure were curious. After all, it was a new language to them. It's spirit language, Spera was the one who answered. Spirit language? Colleen asked. At Colleen's question, Spera looked at her in confusion. Why are you also asking? I'm sure you heard it before. Termilio and his wives converse like this. You are also there in the spirit dimension. Eh? Ha ha ha. Colleen let out an embarrassed laugh. I'm not really paying attention. Mark then spoke to Jones, who was being confused further at Spera and Colleen's banter. It's the language used by magical races. I'm sure that's already a good explanation. Jones was a super soldier and an escapee from Ouroboros, of course. He knew what magical races were. It was just that he never had any concrete familiarity with the language. I see. Jones nodded in understanding, but then, Jones realized. These people are not humans. This was something that did not enter Jones' mind before. After all, he might be a strong person, but he was not magically sensitive. It would be hard for him to just realize if a person was a human or not based on their magical auras. Not exactly. Mark tilted his head and replied. What do you mean? Jones was confused. Are they human or not? Both, I guess, Mark replied with a nod. Huh? Jones was even more confused than before. Mark just shrugged. He was not joking. As the entire encampment was far smaller than his detection radius, Mark already got a feel of all the people in this encampment. All of them were not entirely humans but not entirely magical races, as well. Some of them might be a newer generation. But all of them were half-breeds of humans and magical races. That was why it became hard for Jones to realize that they were magical races. It was because the majority of them looked more human than not. Even the guard that was leading them inside only looked like a caveman with a bushy beard and unkempt hair. He was on the taller side in stature, though, and his skin was a dark shade of brown. If one was not sensitive enough, it was easy to mistake them as humans, especially now that mutators with beast-like abilities exist and looked a lot less human than the members of this group. Soon, Mark's group was brought to the hut at the center of the encampment. Unlike most of the huts and shelters, it was entirely made of vines and living plants. "Come inside." The soothing voice echoed once more. The guard stood outside and let Mark's group in. Inside, a beautiful woman sat on a flower seat. Mark realized why her voice was quite soothing. The leader of the group was actually a half-Dewata. Day 162 to 12:29 p.m. Ragtag Encampment, New Infanta Settlement, Infanta, Province of Quezon. With only Mark's group and the woman sitting on the flower seat inside the hut, there was no distraction from observing the half-Dewata. Half-beings were not unheard of in myths and folklore. However, there was a difference between races that needed other races to continue and races that did not need such conditions. Takabalangs may have a female counterpart, the Ongate. However, they were known to make female humans bear their children instead. There were also the Tamawas, who did not have any females in their race. They had to rely on human females to procreate. In these two cases, all of their race could be considered as half-races. However, the blood of the race was too strong that they override their human blood. After some time, they would transform into the race of their fathers. Other races, however, did not have such capabilities. It created true half-breeds that were scorned by the rest of their races. This group of half-races was likely formed after those half-breeds were cast out of their respective tribes. And if front of Mark's group was one of the rarest kind even in folklore, a half-Dewata. Of course, not a Dewata who was half-human. Dewatas were kind, and stories about them falling in love with a human male were not zero. What made the Dewata in front of Mark's group rare was because she was a half-demon. There was no need to describe how much Dewatas shaped by Bathala hated the beings of the underworld. And yet, the woman in front of Mark existed. Was she born from true love? Or was she a result of a heinous experience? The woman sat on her flower seat, with her long, silver hair, golden pupils, and black-colored gown. She had pointy ears and even had fangs. Each of such were definitely not the characteristics of a Dewata. Yet, she had the aura and appearance of one. Mark could not help but feel curious. The half-Dewata received Mark's stare with the same action. It seemed that she was trying to measure Mark, only for her eyes to dilate in surprise. "You." The woman spoke first. "What are you? Are you really a demon?" Just how many times had Mark heard that question? Although it was the first time that Mark heard it from a being far weaker than the previous ones. She managed to see through him not because she was strong, it was because of her insights. The woman's soothing voice was definitely filled with shock and confusion as she asked Mark that question. "I don't think I have to answer that question," Mark replied. "Just consider me an unusual demon." That nonchalant attitude did not offend the woman. Instead, she felt more curious. "You smell like a pureblood, yet had the insidious aura of miasma. Quite unusual indeed." The woman nodded. "This one is called Artenaris. Consider me as the leader of this tribe. The tribe of outcast half-beings." Artenaris respectfully introduced herself. There was no haughtiness that a demon usually had or even the high regard of herself that was a quality of most Dewatas. She was talking to Mark as an equal, not lower, and definitely not higher. "Then, call me Mark," Mark replied. "As for the ones behind me, there's no need to introduce them. They can't even understand us talking." "I know." Artenaris smiled with a smile that looked like blooming flowers. "But that large man behind you, this one had already seen him before. He was among the leaders of humans in this place, is he not?" Is she talking about me? Jones tapped Mark's shoulder, seeing that Ardenaris was talking while staring at him. She said that she saw you before and thought that you're one of the leaders of the settlement. Mark replied to Jones before turning back to the half-Dewata. He's not one of the leaders. He's just the right hand of the leader who got injured. This one understands. Ardenaris nodded. This one wants to inquire. What is your purpose in wanting to converse with us? Are you with these humans? That is odd on its own, but I haven't seen you before. This one will never neglect to greet someone as powerful as you if we entered this place before. As it appeared, Ardenaris knew that Mark was more powerful than her. Even more than anyone in her tribe. Thus, she took the initiative to invite him and his group inside. It was all before any conflict arose from the tribe members trying to chase anyone away. I'm just curious, Mark replied. Rather, the leader of this human settlement wanted to know the purpose of your group and why you all appeared here. You should know that it's human territory. Any wrong move can cause them to make a move against your tribe and put you all in danger. At Mark's inquiry, Ardenaris sighed. It was not like we wanted to be here. We had no other choice. Ardenaris answered. This one would like to share our story. Would you please hear it? At the moment, all of you could take a seat. It must be uncomfortable to stay standing. I don't mind. Mark replied to the delight of Ardenaris. And as the half-Dewata waved her hand, vines and large leaves extended from the walls and ceiling, forming chairs and tables for everyone inside the hut. It was one of the abilities of Dewatas to control nature in one way or another. The rest of Mark's group was surprised to see a lot of things moving around them. Seats and tables formed in two places, with a single chair and table forming in front of Ardenaris. You guys take a seat, she said. Mark told the rest while he took the seat in front of the half-Dewata. Everyone sat down, and Mark began to listen to the story of Ardenaris and her tribe. As she said, they were a group of outcasts from different races. It was all because they were half of another race. Unpure blood. Cursed beings. Filthy creatures. There were a lot of things that they were called. Most of these things were not favorable to the ears. As outcasts, they would live their tribes, either ending up traveling or living alone somewhere secluded. And if one outcast met another, it was not hard to see what would happen. Outcasts living together was not really an impossible sight to see.
Ardenaris was the same. Her mother was a young Dewata, while her father was an archdemon.
All of them gathered together, and being a half-Dewata, she was the strongest of the group and became its leader. All of them had been living secludedly in the mountains between Infanta and Real. However, they were chased away from their initial home. It was when the black duendes in the south became more and more active. Not to mention they colluded with demons, making contact even more dangerous. The tribe traveled far, losing many members as they braved the dangerous spirit dimension. They all took a new place as their home near the coast of Infanta. That was when suddenly, the land broke into pieces. Ardenaris protected her tribe as much as she could. But they still lost many. The remaining ones woke up in a new place, unknown to them. Unfortunately, the new environment was not friendly. They were attacked by various dangers just in a single day. They were forced to move. It was until they noticed the barrier from afar. When they reached the place, they saw that it was inhabited by humans. The first time they arrived, the humans were fighting with metal monsters outside the barrier. Ardenaris tasked some of their warriors to help the humans despite the danger. In exchange, they would like to occupy a piece of land inside the barrier. Unfortunately, there was a language barrier. All of them being outcasts that were never raised by their parents, none of them learned anything about the human language. Thus, there was no negotiation that happened. Even so, Ardenaris had no choice. They still occupied the area as small as they could, hoping that the humans would not get offended. Fortunately, it seemed that the human soldiers did not make trouble with them. The other humans were also avoiding them. That was the best scenario they could have. Well, until this morning. It sure had to do something with that guy earlier, right? Mark asked. Unfortunately, yes. Ardenaris nodded gracefully. Although this one mostly spends time inside the hut, this one also goes outside from time to time. Apparently, that man seemed to have seen me. We don't really understand what he was saying and yelling, but this one could at least tell that it was about this one. Ardenaris then sighed. It was always like this. Her troubles were not unwarranted. Ardenaris sure was a beautiful lady. The contrast between her kind face and her fiery-looking eyes was just alluring. She also had a soothing aura around her despite having a body as attractive as a succubus. Not to mention her voice that was like a cold breeze in the warm night. "This isn't the first time, is it?" Mark asked. "Yes." Ardenaris nodded. "This one had told you about the black duendes. Their king tried to forcefully bring this one as one of his wives back then. We had no choice but to flee." Mark could not help but cough a bit. Teremalio's father sure was a great womanizer. In any case, the kingdom of black duendes did not exist anymore. "Well, I guess I indirectly helped you with one thing," Mark declared. Ardenaris was confused. "Help with what?" "The king of black duendes is already dead, and his kingdom had already fallen. We destroyed it, after all." "Huh?" Ardenaris stared at Mark in annoyance. "Please, do not joke with this one's problems." "Do I look like I'm joking?" Mark stared at Ardenaris, making her waver. "You did not seem so," Ardenaris replied with a bit of hesitation. "If that was truly the case, this one will have to thank you. This one did not know what to do if the king of black duendes chased after us. He was a relentless one, after all." It seemed that Mark's group coincidentally got rid of one of the problems that Ardenaris had. But of course, it was not the last. "So, your tribe only wants to stay here for safety, right?" Mark asked. "Yes." Ardenaris nodded. "If possible, please relay it to the leaders of the humans. We did not want any trouble. We just want to live. It makes us wonder why the humans were being protected while we were thrown out in the open, waving through dangers." "It seems you're not privy about the eyes, huh?" Mark said. "Eyes?" That question from Ardenaris alone answered Mark's statement. "My curiosity is a bit filled, so I'll relay what you said." Mark said. "You have this one's gratitude." Ardenaris bowed her head. "Although I have a proposition," Mark added, making Ardenaris stare at him. "Why don't your tribe move to my place?" "Your place? What do you mean?" "I don't mean anything else. Just exactly what I said. You and your tribe can move to my place. All you have to do there is to help with things like farming and fighting dangers. I believe you can do that." And to Mark's proposition, Ardenaris answered. "This one is interested in your suggestion. However, this one believes that it was not easy to just follow the words of someone you just met. This one could see that you did not harbor any ill thoughts. But it did not mean that we could trust you unconditionally." "It's fine." Mark shrugged. "I'm not forcing anyone. Besides, the leader of this settlement does not pose your people any threat for now. But you know, not all humans can be controlled even by their leader." Mark suddenly smiled. And in the eyes of Ardenaris, it appeared to be a bad omen. "You bastards! Let's see how you all grovel in fear." A loud roar of a man could be heard from outside the encampment. It was then followed by bam, a sound of a gunshot. Day 162 to 12:45 p.m. Ragtag Encampment, New Infanta Settlement, Infanta, Province of Quezon. With that sound of a gunshot, there was no way that anyone would be able to ignore it. "Is this your doing?" Ardenaris could not help but ask Mark, considering his ominous smile and the timing of the commotion. "You think I would need to resort to something like this and associate myself to idiots?" Mark asked back. Ardenaris stared at Mark before shaking her head immediately. While she could not measure Mark's exact strength, she knew that he was powerful. Powerful enough that even the entire remaining members of the tribe would not hold a candle against him. Just with his strength alone, he could capture them and force them to become his slaves. There was no need to resort to a roundabout method like this. "Just what in the world is that idiot doing now?" Jones stood from his seat and turned to Mark. "Mark, I think we better address the situation first." You can continue the talk later. There, Mark also stood up. It's fine. We're already done here. Mark replied and glanced at Ardenaris. You're also going to check the situation, right? Why not go together with us? Then, this one will accept your invitation, Ardenaris replied. The half-Dewata slowly stood from the seat she never left since the start. Then, her body was covered with light. It was not blinding. However, it was enough to obscure everyone of her appearance. It just took a second or two, and the light immediately dimmed. There, a young woman in her teens stood. She looked like a beggar in tattered tribal clothing. There were even marks of dirt smeared all over her body. If not for the fact that her face looked similar to Ardenaris, one would think that it was a different person. Her aura was also non-existent. Even if she was a beauty, no one would easily notice her within a crowd of people. Colleen and the rest could not help but stare at the absurd scene. After all, it was too magical. Ardenaris then stepped forward beside Mark. Should we go? She asked, still calm about the situation outside. If you had this form, you should have used it every time you went out, or that guy outside had not seen you. Mark spoke. I do use this form every time I go out. However, I don't think that even humans would dress up when just walking around their backyards. Ardenaris replied. Well, that's true. Mark shrugged. But it looks like not only your appearance changed but also the way you talk. I don't know. Ardenaris widely smiled. It just changes naturally, but I think that it is not the issue right now. With those words, the group went outside. They reached the gates, only to see a group of about 30 people lined up outside. And, of course, the person in the lead was the same man thrown out earlier, Jackson. I said, get the fuck out of the way, or the next shot will be into your brains. Jackson yelled out loud. It seemed that he was not entirely stupid to just force things immediately. He seemed to be using numbers and weapons to intimidate the guards into opening the gates and letting them in. Unfortunately, it was not working. The cavemen-looking guards stood in front of the gates with their spears ready. They were not afraid of a fight. Even if they died, they would take a whole lot of enemies with them. Boss, intimidation is not working. A well-built man standing beside Jackson spoke. These cavemen don't even understand what we are saying for them to feel intimidated. Just kill one of them to say that we mean business. Do I need you to tell me what to do? Jackson snarled at the man, even pointing his pistol at the man's head. The man did not seem afraid but raised his hands and took a step back. I don't mean that, but we won't be achieving anything just by standing still. The man urged Jackson even more. HMPF, Jackson, I know. At those words, Jackson pointed his pistol at one of the guards, causing the cavemen to be even more prepared to retaliate. This time, Jackson was ready to spill blood. It was just a single pull of the trigger. However, before he was able to do so, the gates of the encampment opened. Jackson thought that these weird people finally felt fear, but his face changed, seeing the group that came out of the gates. Just what do you think you people are doing? Jones Galley asked with an intimidating stare. The group of hoodlums was confused seeing the general's right-hand man coming out of the encampment. Even more, seeing Colleen, the major's daughter and someone well known in the settlement. Well, not all in good light, though. Colleen was more known due to her rampage episodes, causing a huge amount of damages and even almost caused deaths in both military and civilian populations. Jackson stared at the group in surprise. After all, he could not understand how they were able to enter the place without problems while he was thrown out. Why are you all inside there? How did you get in? Jackson asked in an irritated tone. He saw a beautiful lady earlier and could not help but wanted to meet her. However, as he forced himself in, even trying to slip through the gates, he was thrown out instead. To experience that humiliation was something that a son of a politician like him could swallow. Nonetheless, meeting that woman was more important to him than the humiliation for some reason. Even if he had to kill, he must meet her. I don't think that that's the problem here, Jackson, Jones spoke, stepping forward. Causing a commotion like this. Did your father know about it? You know that mobilizing an armed group inside the settlement would cost you some consequences? Tisk. Jackson clicked his tongue, hatefully staring at Jones. Boss, we better step back this time. The well-built man whispered to the congressman's son. I don't think we can win against the general's dog in an upfront confrontation even with our current numbers. *T. This is not over. Jackson cursed at the guards before flipping a finger at Jones. All of you, let's go. Jones frowned but did not say anything else. The guards did not do anything, and everyone just watched them walk away. At this time, Mark spoke. Geez. Just kill them. What is the point in doing this? Of course, Mark would grumble. He wanted to take action and shed some blood. After all, there was no use for a source of trouble like that to continue existing. However, before they came out, Jones requested him to just stay put. That was why Mark was just watching the scene together with Carla, Spera, and Ardenaris at the back while Jones and Colleen took the front. Huh. Easy for you to say. Jones replied. He might be troublesome, but he's still the son of a congressman. Not to mention a congressman that held a bit of power in the settlement. He had his own supply stock and even a private army composed of mutators. They managed to rope in. We can't just start a conflict with them. Even more, this time when everything is uncertain. If you ask me, I really want to squeeze that idiot's head to a pulp. But I still represent the general. I can't. By the looks of it, Jones had his fair share of troubles being in his current position. A mercenary like him who was living by shedding the blood of others must be having a hard time holding back while dealing with these troublesome people. Human lives sure are complicated, Ardenaris remarked to the side, realizing what was happening. They have a whole lot of unnecessary things to consider. I can't deny that, Mark replied. Mark then turned to Jones. Hey. Then, you better take responsibility for that, right? Responsibility? What are you talking about? Jones frowned at Mark talking riddles. I mean, if we got rid of that guy now, she would have one less problem. Mark pointed his thumb at Ardenaris. That guy is targeting her, after all. But since you don't want to kill them, he will surely cause more trouble in the future. So you must take responsibility for that. Mark smiled. You? Jones was speechless. Mark just dumped a whole lot of work on him all of a sudden. Then, scratching his head, Jones complained. You should know that killing that guy will only invite more trouble, right? That doting father of his won't just stand idly after his son was killed. Then, just kill them all. Mark shrugged. What are you afraid of? The government? As if that still exists. Those politicians are taking matters into their hands. Why don't you guys do the same? You guys are afraid of infighting. There wouldn't be any infighting if the military did not let the opposing parties exist in the first place. Ha ha ha. Jones could not help but laugh. You really have a bloodthirsty mindset. If it was just me, I'd prefer what you were saying. But, the say in this is not on me. That was true. Jones was just following orders. In the end, the decision of the general would still prevail in this situation. In any case, I get your point, Jones added. I will post some soldiers nearby to stop that idiot from causing trouble here. Of course, if we knew their purpose in the first place. Right. Mark tapped his chin. I need to tell you. Closing the gates once more, Mark told Jones about the current situation of the tribe. Especially that they just wanted to stay peacefully in this area since they did not have anywhere else to go. In exchange, they would help guard the area against enemies from the outside. Mark served as the translator as Jones and Ardenaris conversed with each other. It was tiring, but it was a new experience. In the end, Jones said that he would convey the conversation to the general, and he was sure of a positive response. After all, who would deny help from a small but powerful group of people? Only an idiot would not accept that kind of help in these trying times. Not to mention that they were not asking for any kind of rations. They only wanted to have a place to stay while they provide themselves with their own food for consumption. It was a win-win scenario for both the tribe and the military. The meetup and conversation spent more than an hour. It ended with Ardenaris conveying her gratitude. "You have this one's gratitude," Ardenaris said to Mark in her true form. "We're having a hard time because of the language barrier. We're lucky that you came today. With this, we might have more peaceful days to come." "It's fine," Mark said. "Usually, I will ask for remuneration for my work, but satisfying my curiosity is fine this time. In any case, my proposition still stands. If your tribe can't live here anymore, you're all welcome in my place." Mark added, "This one will keep that in mind." Ardenaris nodded. "Still, this one is confused as to why you seem adamant to invite us. Don't tell me, you two." Ardenaris seemed to hesitate to continue her words. Nonetheless, she seemed to be blushing a bit. But then, Ardenaris voiced out uncomfortably as she snapped back. She then noticed that Mark's eyes were releasing a bit of red glow. "Don't flatter yourself too much," Mark said. "I'm not interested in you in that way. Also, I already have a wife. I'm not looking for others." Ardenaris took a deep breath. Then, she must be lucky. "Well, maybe," Mark replied. "Anyway, we already spent a lot of time here. We still need to go home. Then, this one will see you all out." There, Ardenaris watched Mark's group as they walked away. She could not help but shiver at her experience just now. Ardenaris might be a half-Dewata, but she was also a half-demon. It was not wrong to say that rather than face, strength appeal more to her. She could not help but blush at the thought that someone as strong as Mark could be interested in her. She would prefer a plain-looking but strong Mark than a handsome-looking but weak Jackson. That thought might have bloomed some feeling if left alone. But then, the feeling of budding interest was suddenly replaced with fear and uncertainty. Ardenaris was sure. Mark did something. If that was true, then Mark's wife was lucky. Because he was willing to erase any other woman's interest in him as the opposite gender just for her. Day 162 to 2:21 p.m. Infirmary, Military Encampment, New Infanta Settlement, Infanta, Province of Quezon. After leaving the encampment of the tribe of half-races, Mark's group made their way back to the encampment of the military. Mark already planned to go home since there was nothing else left to make him stay. He wanted to leave as soon as possible. The depressive environment of the settlement was suffocating for an empath like him. Furthermore, there was not only the emotional fluctuations of the people that affected him. There were also other things troubling him that were far more annoying. "Is it just me, or is it getting cold?" Colleen voiced out as they traced back the way they walked before. By the looks of it, it was not only her. Even Jones realized the sudden drop in temperature. At this time, Mark spoke. "Just don't mind it." They were confused. However, since Mark did not want to elaborate, they just shut their mouths. It did not take too long, and they were already in the vicinity of the military encampment. It was when Carla tapped on Mark's hand. "What is it?" Mark asked the little girl. "Hungry," Carla replied. Mark shrugged and took out his phone to check the time. Seeing that it was already almost half an hour past 2 in the afternoon, he could only nod. "Let's stop by the general one last time, then we'll eat before we leave," Mark told Carla, making her nod in reply. "Want me to tell the cooks to prepare something?" Jones asked. After all, Mark's group were guests. He could at least offer some hospitality. "Just save your food for yourselves," Mark replied. "We have our own." "If you say so." Jones shrugged. "But if you are going to cook something, please cook somewhere hidden. We are getting complaints about the rations these past days." That statement made Mark give Jones a shrug. "I'm pretty sure that those people complaining are those who don't really do anything but wait for food to be laid before them, right?" Jones could also wear a bitter expression at that statement. After all, Mark was on point. They reached the infirmary and met the general one more time. He was still in a serious conversation with Major Bautista when they arrived. "All of you are back," General Faustino greeted. "How is it, Mark?" "They sure are an interesting group," Mark replied. "I tried to invite them to my base, but they declined for now." "Huh? General Faustino was surprised. It looks like my hunch is right. You could converse with them. I thought that some of them resembled creatures from folklore and myths. Since you came here with a fairy with you before, I thought you might be able to understand their language. Mark knew that the general was talking about Amihan. However, Amihan was using human language since the start and did not have much to do with Mark being able to speak the spirit language. Nonetheless, Mark did not bother to explain as it was unnecessary. And since it was already the topic, Jones relayed a bit of the conversation with Ardenaris to the general, making him nod in understanding. We will talk about this later and plan it all out. We should also announce their cooperation with us so that the people would be less wary. General Faustino said. Anyway, that will be the job for you soldiers, Mark interjected. We just came here once more to say that we will leave after we eat lunch. Is that so? General Faustino looked at Mark and then to Major Bautista. Major Bautista then nodded and turned to Mark. Mark, can I ask you a favor? What is it now? Mark replied. It's nothing much. I just decided to stay here and fulfill my duties. So I will leave Colleen and Carla to you once more. As for Professor Sandoval and his family, let them stay in your base for a while. It will be Joash's group who would take over my duties as the professor's escorts. Well, there's no problem with me, Mark replied. Then, thank you. Major Bautista nodded and turned to his daughter. Sorry if I have to separate from you again. And to those words, Colleen shook her head. I already expected this. Even Mom complains a lot because you always prioritize your duties in the military over your family. So, it's fine. I'm sorry. Major Bautista approached his daughter and gave her a hug. Don't worry. I'm not angry, Colleen replied. Mom is the same. She always complained, but she also said before that your diligence in your work is one of the reasons she loved you. Major Bautista shook his head and silently smiled. Colleen also returned the embrace. After all, it might be the last time they would be with each other for quite a long time. While the father and daughter were in their own world, General Faustino spoke to Mark. Actually, I have a question. What is it? Mark asked. Is it possible for you to take refugees from here to your base? The general inquired, and to that inquiry, Mark replied with a frown. I'm pretty sure that you already expected my answer to that. So, it's impossible. General Faustino shook his head bitterly. I know this would be your answer, but I still want to take my chances. You don't have to take chances. Mark crossed his arms in annoyance. There is no way I will take in leeches into my place. Those words from Mark's mouth spoke about the greatest problem in the settlement. People being leeches. It was not wrong to feel helpless in the face of an unavoidable catastrophe as long as the people had the urge to take their steps and continue moving forward. However, the majority of the people did not have that urge, and instead, relied on other people to give them sustenance. In this case, it was the military who was being relied upon. However, even the military had its own problems, yet, they had to help people who were not even trying to help themselves. One example of this situation was the current state of the farmlands in the new Infanta settlement. While it was true that people needed some knowledge to plant crops, there was not much knowledge needed to be able to plow the fields. Even children could do it. Yet, there was only a handful of volunteers currently working in the fields. If everyone were to help, even just in plowing, these farm fields should have long been ready for planting new crops. The settlement was struggling, and the people were not helping at all. There was no way Mark would take in those kinds of people. Anyway, I'm pretty sure you are asking me that because of the things you heard from Major Bautista. Mark glanced at the father and daughter that were already finished in their talk. Don't blame him. It's me who should take responsibility for asking him. General Faustino spoke with a serious face. Don't worry. I'm not looking to blame anyone. I don't care anymore about these things. There's nothing you guys will be able to do anyway with the information you got. Mark jeered. Those words from Mark turned the general's serious expression into a bitter and helpless one. After all, Mark was speaking facts here. Anyway, we should end it here. Mark continued. I made some time to bring the major here, but I'm also a busy person. Well, I won't hold you any longer, but just one last question. General Faustino stated, having his serious expression once more. Say it. But I'll only answer depending on the question. Mark replied. Within your knowledge, does Earth have any possibility to recover from these disasters? The question from the general made everyone confused. After all, why would he ask that kind of question to Mark of all people? However, Mark stared at the general with a sigh. This guy was asking him, knowing the possibility that he had information that even they from the military did not have. In any case, any answer to this question would sound like a piece of personal opinion. Thus, there was no reason for Mark to hold back. Earth recovering from this mess. That's only a fleeting dream. Expect things to get worse than getting better. The infected will continue to get stronger, and there will be more and more encounters with the Mechids. Humanity is doomed if we lagged behind even a single step. Is this the answer you want from me? That answer is fine. Thank you. General Faustino thanked Mark, but it was clear in his face that he was troubled. However, he was not troubled by the answer he was given. It was more like he was thinking about the steps to take from here on based on Mark's response. Then, we'll have lunch first before we leave. Oh, we will cook our own, so don't bother your volunteers to cook for us. With that, Mark's group left the infirmary. Major Bautista still accompanied them, however. After all, they were not leaving yet, and he wanted to spend more time with his daughter before the separation. Mark's group cooked lunch within the outskirts of the settlement, and to say, it was not a comfortable one. The lunch was some instant spaghetti that Mark had inside his ring. And unfortunately, the smell was more than enough to get the attention of people passing by. And the stares they were getting were definitely annoying. The soldiers were fine, but the refugees might have approached them and begged if not for Chaflar resting beside them. There were also some annoying people who were watching in the shadows. It seemed that these people should be affiliated with the politicians and were trying to observe Mark's group as close as possible. Mark was annoyed and wanted to strike down those people. Unfortunately, he already gave his word to not cause any trouble this time. In any case, they were leaving after eating. It was still tolerable to just ignore them. While eating, Mark was also paying attention to the surroundings. He was keeping track of the soldiers. However, it seemed that nothing notable was happening. Rather, they were perplexed that the mechanical shark from this morning did not return at all. Some were worried that the shark would attack when they least expected. It was better to deal with it as soon as possible. Mark also tried to survey the river by sending Ignis to patrol while they were still in the settlement. However, even the demon sword found no traces of the mechanical shark. It was as if it did not exist at all. This made Mark a bit more annoyed. The possibility that Mechids could perceive danger and escape from it was troublesome. It was extremely different from most infected, who only knew how to charge and use any ability they had towards their target. What if the majority of Mechids had this function? And since they were robots, they should be capable of remembering things. Which meant that a Mechid that escaped could remember any danger they encountered and escaped from and could possibly formulate any form of revenge. If that was the case, that mechanical shark could come back in an absurd way that would cause a large number of casualties. Mark could only keep a mental note this time. That was not to let any Mechid they encounter escape, no matter how many or what size it had. Soon, they finished lunch. Before going, Mark told his thoughts about the Mechids to Major Bautista. For sure, this information would reach the general. It was better that way. It would be bad if their neighbor got done in by Mechids, just because the things from his theories happened. After all, the existence of this settlement still served some purpose for Mark. Colleen's father was also staying here. And with that, the rest of Mark's group left, riding on Chaflar's back, leaving Major Bautista in the settlement. Day 163 to 12:21 a.m. Cliff House, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. We're here, sorry for intruding, Colleen and Alana said respectively as they entered the door of the Cliff House. Morning training had just finished, and it was already lunchtime. Since Colleen was still tired from the journey yesterday, they decided to just skip the afternoon training. After taking a late morning bath, the two went to the cliff house as it was the best place to spend time in the mountain base.
It was not like there were no other places to hang out. There was the garden pool right at the center of the base. It was where Miliel, the mermaid, was living. She already opened up to humans and could converse to some extent. Thus accompanying her while wasting time was not a bad idea. There was also the recreation area. It was a park-like open area also at the center of the base but just on the north side of the Night-Evered Spirit Tree. Although it was mainly a facility with park furniture, benches, and even a playground for children, it also had a mini theater where people could watch available movies in their free time. Entertainment facilities like this might seem unnecessary in the apocalypse. However, everyone agreed to build one. It was a very good way to relieve stress. After all, stress was something that everyone needed to get rid of to maintain a positive outlook and productive performance. The other two places were good. However, Colleen and Alana preferred to spend time in the cliff house. Spending time with friends was a pretty nice way to relax. You two are always welcome here, Odalina said as she let the two enter with a smile. But don't make too much noise this time. Question marks were clear on the expression of the two. It was until they arrived at the living room that they understood why. The living room was the largest area in the house that Mark made. It was because it also served as a multi-purpose room. It had enough chairs, a long table, a writing board, and even small tools to serve as a meeting room. It was also being used as the dining room to save some space. Most and foremost, the room was also equipped with a few items for entertainment for both children and adults alike. On one of the sofas, May sat with a subtle smile and caring eyes. On her lap was Mark, sleeping like a log. On the opposite sofa, Elise sat, reading a pocketbook. She was silent, obviously because she did not want to wake up Mark. In the southeast corner of the living room, the dining table was occupied by Mark's daughters, along with Odalina's children and even Carla. They were all playing a board game together. They were a bit noisy, but it was strange that it was not waking Mark up. Aside from them, there was also Jaya and Pafile present. The former was spending time with her adopted son, Theo. The latter, on the other hand, was just sitting down, unexpectedly reading a cookbook. Mara was also here, obviously with her sister, Jeanette. And since Jeanette was here, and so is Snow. There were a whole lot of people in the living room. Yet, Mark was able to sleep fine and undisturbed. Whoa. This is odd, Colleen said as she took a seat next to Elise. Mark can actually sleep like there's no tomorrow. Please don't make too much noise. Elise put down her pocketbook and strictly reprimanded Colleen. I haven't even made any noise yet. Colleen grumbled. Amihan is tuning down the noise around Master. But if you are this close, you might wake him up. Odalina reminded as she passed by, going to the kitchen. It was only when Colleen and Alana noticed Amihan sitting on the armrest beside May, obviously using some kind of magic. So, that is why. Colleen nodded in understanding and then turned to Elise. Though I can't believe you can reprimand people now. Elise flinched. She just did not want her elder brother to get disturbed in his rest that she acted out of character. Now that she was reminded of it, she could only shyly cover her face with her pocketbook. Bessie, don't make fun of her. Seriously, Alana said to her childish best friend with a sigh. Still, I didn't expect that almost everyone is here this time. Alana said that as she turned her head around the room. The children were not surprised to be here and playing. The same was to be said for Jaya and the two queen-type infected. They were, after all, the most behaved when Mark was around. But what about Pafile? Hey, Pafile, Alana called out with a bit silent voice. Shouldn't you be taking care of your wife? Edsel and Pearl are there right now. Pafile put down the cookbook in his hand and replied. You know that my relationship with Edsel is still complicated, so it's better for me to leave them alone. That's true. Alana nodded. But what's with the cookbook? This. Pafile waved the cookbook, showing that it was actually about nutritious desserts. I'm just looking to see if there's a dessert I can cook for Celine for dinner. Alright. Please also don't disturb me. I'll get back to reading. Hearing him, Alana shrugged and did not pester the Tomoe any longer. Pafile was not that talkative and could sound rude at times. Everyone was already used to it, though. A handsome man, cooking for his wife. I wish I also had someone like that. Colleen grumbled. It's too early for you, Bessie. Alana tapped Colleen's shoulder. Huh. Colleen was confused. You might be a few months older than me, but we're basically the same age, you know. Why is it early for me? Bessie. Alana sighed. We might be the same in physical age, but your mental age is young enough to have the FBI called on someone. What? Colleen was flabbergasted. However, the ones that heard Alana were just nodding or shrugging in agreement. Hey! Colleen exclaimed, noticing everyone's reaction. And, of course, shish. Colleen was reprimanded while they pointed at the sleeping Mark. Be quiet, please. May stared at the two. Gerger had been really busy these past few days and was really tired because of yesterday. I finally forced him to rest, so please don't ruin it. May was angry, and the two could only shut up. However, it was clear now that Mark was not resting because he wanted to, but May forced him to. Still, the two could not fathom how Mark was still asleep even at this time. After all, this guy was too sensitive to his surroundings. He would detect anyone staring at him, even from a far distance. Yet, Colleen and Alana arrived, made a bit of noise, and were even staring at Mark. Yet, he was still asleep. Don't be too confused. Odalina returned and spoke to the two. I also don't know why, but Master can only sleep like this because of the mistress. Then, Odalina handed a few things to May. It seemed that she was on the way to get these when Colleen and Alana arrived. So, it's only something that May can do, huh? Alana said, looking at Mark's sleeping face. It was when they saw what Odalina gave May. It was actually a pack of cotton buds. May then began to clean his ear as he sleep. Hey, it looks like he liked it. That's unexpected. Colleen said as they saw Mark look way more relaxed than before. Gerger might not look the type, but he really likes this kind of stuff. May gently spoke. He also likes getting his head getting patted and scratched. He also likes cute things. As that's so. Colleen sure was surprised. No, Mark liking cute things really isn't surprising. Alana interjected, getting May, Colleen, and even Elise's attention. How can you say so? Colleen asked. Mark's an otaku, right? That alone explains it. Alana explained. Well, you otakus are weird people. Colleen remarked, gaining Alana's annoyed-looking eyes. These two always try to insult each other when they get the opportunity. Are they really the best of friends? As the two bickered, Amihan muttered while sitting on May's side. Some human friendships go like that, Amihan, May replied. They were so close that they had no fear of falling out with each other from such jokes. As that's so, Amihan replied, still could not understand Colleen's and Alana's friendship. Don't think about it too much, May said to Amihan. Even I don't understand it thoroughly since I never had such kind of friendship with other people. Me too. Elise agreed. I don't really understand their kind of people. Elise, a neglected child and bullied in school, definitely had no understanding of such relationships. You three are being rude. Colleen said, looking at the three, whispering. Anyway, it is really good that we can relax like this here, Alana said, panning her eyes throughout the room. Back in the military settlement, we can't relax even a second. We can only take a breather because there is nothing much to do at the moment, May replied. We can't go out of the barrier without getting sick. What we can do is limited. Yeah, that's true. Colleen agreed. It actually feels kind of boring. I guess we are already used to living in this world. What Colleen said was what everyone here could agree on. Back before the apocalypse, life was peaceful for most people. If peace felt boring now, It just meant that they already adapted to the chaotic state the world had right now. You all should treasure the peace we currently had. At this point, Jaya's voice echoed in their minds. They could not help but turn to Jaya, who was playing with Theo. Once the barrier is down, we might not get rest even if we wanted to. Jaya added. That was also true. The barrier that the eyes created would not last forever. It might be protecting the base from foreign elements for now. But when it wore off, who knows what would happen? Jaya's words caused silence in the room. Those words were worth the time to think about. Still, at this point, it's only Mark who had interesting things to do. Alana mentioned. Now that you mention it, that's true. Colleen agreed. Patrolling around the base might not be that interesting. However, when Mark was not on patrol, he was designing weapons and testing things. He was even studying the golem they brought back from the kingdom of Black Duendes. And to say, Mark was making good progress with things he was doing. Especially that weapon Mark used yesterday to penetrate that mechanical shark's body that even hot weaponry of the military could not damage. Mark did say that the aim was off and it needed more adjustment. However, it was already a success when it could damage an enemy that modern weapons could not. Even Mark's study of the golem was progressing faster than they thought. He was already near the process of designing golems where the golem cores that Bathala gave the little girls could be used on. Now that they thought about it, Mark sure was doing a whole lot of things. They were sure that he was also onto stuff they did not know about. For some reason, I'm feeling bad right now. Colleen murmured as she glanced at the sleeping Mark. If you feel that way, stop skipping training. Alana jeered at her best friend. Just because Uncle Alfonso is not here doesn't mean you can be lazy. You know that I'm still tired from yesterday's travel, right? Colleen grumbled. Riding on a dragon's back sounds cool, but it's not exactly the most comfortable ride, all right. They are at it again. Bickering. Elise murmured as she tried to scoot away further from the two, although she could not because the three of them sat on the same sofa. Fortunately, the bickering did not wake Mark up, with Amihan working hard to stop the noise from reaching him. Day 169 to 5:21 p.m. Workshop. Cliff House, Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of a hammer echoed as it hit a piece of metal inside the workshop. No one could hear the noise from outside as it was a room inside the rocky wall of the cliff. As such, almost no one from outside knew of the things happening inside. Inside the workshop, Mark held a large hammer as he pounded a sword affixed on the worktable. He was not fixing the sword, however. He was flattening it from the edge while it was tightly clamped onto a bench clamp. The sword was not just any regular sword, either. It was a magical sword. If anyone in the know saw Mark bend the perfectly fine sword like this, they would scream in dismay. A magical sword sure was an extremely rare item in the realm of humans. Yet, Mark was on the verge of breaking it for reasons he solely knew. Crack, creak. The sword slowly began to make uncanny noises as its metal blade cracked into pieces. Clang. And soon, the part being hammered broke, scattering pieces of metal all over the work table. Seeing the mess, Mark did not show any reaction. He only let go of the hammer and put it on the table as he searched the fragments of the sword. It did not take long, and he found what he was looking for. Carefully picking up the things he looked for, it was actually small pieces of metal that looked different from the metal that should have composed the sword he broke. The blade of the magical sword had a grayish-silver sheen. The pieces that Mark picked up appeared to be crystal despite being metal in texture. It also contained too little. Mark murmured as he looked at a small clear container in a display cabinet not far from him. He then compared the contents of the container and the metal pieces he had in his hand. The contents of the container were actually pieces of metal similar to what he currently had on his hand. Seeing that it was the same, Mark put the metal pieces in his hand into the container. Then, he proceeded to break the rest of the sword. It was not the first magic sword that Mark broke in these past days. It was actually the 10th. This number was more than enough to drive people crazy. Rare artifacts of the mythological era were actually being destroyed into pieces by Mark. One after another. Even Barrack might have a heart attack if he heard what Mark did. However, Mark looked at the container in dismay. It's not enough yet. With this thought, he would not stop soon. Even if he had to break most of the magical equipment they managed to get from the kingdom of Black Duendes, he would do it. But what were these crystal-like pieces of metal that Mark was looking for inside the broken magical weapons? It was the magical energy conductor used for the magic circuits inside the weapons. This conductor was the base of these weapons, so it could circulate and even store magical energy for its magical enchantments and effects. An example was the sword Mark was currently breaking. The materials of the sword were not entirely magical. Although it was made of alloy composing some magic metal that did not exist in the mortal dimension, a large portion of the alloy was steel. The very same kind of steel that humans used in things in their daily lives. Yet, the sword could display a hard-to-rival sharpness that regular steel weapons should not be capable of. Even if it was made of an alloy composed of magic metals, its sharpness was still incredible. It was all thanks to the magic circuits carved inside it and was filled with this magical energy conductor. As for why Mark wanted the magical energy conductors, it was not hard to tell. It had many uses, mainly for crafting magical equipment and weapons. And most importantly, building a magical puppet, commonly known as a golem. Mark's research of the broken golem had a breakthrough the other day. The body of the golem was actually made of magical alloy with regular iron as its base. It was not wrong to say that it was an iron golem. However, it was similar to modern gadgets and appliances. There was some sort of circuitry that ran all across the golem's body. Nonetheless, instead of copper wiring, it had these magical circuits engraved inside. All were made of the very same magical energy conductors. In this case, Mark could start learning about the circuitry since he could follow the ancient documents he was using as a reference. Although there was no way to decipher the wordings in these old papers, they had diagrams. All of which appeared to be magic circles and circuits. If Mark could recreate an experiment on these diagrams, he would be able to see their functions. However, there was a big problem. Mark had no way of making these magical energy conductors by himself. He tried asking Terramilio and his mother, even the other magical races he currently had in his base. No one had a clue to recreate it. From what Mark learned from them, the method for crafting magical items was a lost art in the first place. That was why magical weapons were almost extinct, and most humans had no idea that these things existed. And, of course, it was the same for the magical energy conductors. Considering that the method to make the item Mark needed was lost, he had to resort to a drastic measure. It was to salvage the item from the magical equipment they had. Apparently, it was the same reason why the king of the Black Duendes amassed such a large number of magical weapons in the first place. It was all for them to create a golem. After all, while a magical weapon was incredible on its own, there was no way it could be used without anyone wielding it. Golems, on the other hand, could move on their own. And was proven to be even more destructive. Actually, destroying these rare items hurt Mark too. After all, as a gamer, Mark was a hoarder. He liked to collect things, even unnecessary ones. Not to mention these extremely rare items. Unfortunately, Mark had no choice. If he wanted to develop his own items and create a golem, he had to make some sacrifices. If he succeeded, not only Mark would be able to create a golem, but he would also be able to create his own magical weapons. It would be his first actual magical creation. Although he already made the shooting moon blade that May had, and even the shadow piercer that he created recently, it was not exactly his magical creations. In the first place, the shooting moon blade was already a magical weapon of its own. Mark only changed its shape to suit May more. On the other hand, the shadow piercer was not really a magical weapon. It was only a minified railgun. As long as there was enough power source, it would not even need Mark's black lightning to fire. Due to this reason, Mark was really eager to finish this research. Not to mention that they would need suitable weapons more after the barrier vanished. It was fortunate that nothing much happened around the barrier this past week. The worst was a few mutated animals wandering to the base, fleeing from the radiation. Both Barrick and Annika captured the animals to train. With the lack of events around the base, Mark was able to concentrate on his research. Day 169 to 5:24 p.m. Private Training Area, Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. Clang, clang, clang. In the private training area just beside the cliff house, there was also the sound of metal clashing several times. Different from a magical sword being smashed with a hammer, however. The sound here came from several weapons clashing with one another. This private training area was something that only a few people from Mark's group could use. Well, it was specifically built by Mark so that May could train on her own. May could join the training that the others were participating in. However, it was difficult considering her circumstances. As the wife of the owner of the base, no one would mess with May. Nonetheless, she was still the most eye-catching female in this place. The others would not be able to concentrate in training if she was around. It was even worse for men, who would not be able to resist but ogle at her. Thus, May did her training privately like she always did back in Bay City. From time to time, Colleen and the others would join her. Pretty much like what was happening this time. With a large dull sword held with her both hands, May stood at the center. Around her were Colleen, Alana, Hannah, and, unexpectedly, Feng Zhiro. Feng Zhiro. She was the female Chinese cultivator that Mark and May brought back from their encounter in New Jersey. She had been living in this base for a while already and had already adapted to her current life. Compared to when she arrived here, she was now stronger. From her own words, she seemed to have risen 3 levels of cultivation in the short time that she was living here. And to say, instead of wanting to leave, Feng Zhiro was happy to stay here and serve the base. Not only that the base was too suitable for her cultivation, but even though she was more or less an offender because of what happened before, she was treated better in this place. Even better compared to when she was living in her sect. Now, Feng Zhiro was not only helping with May's combat training but was also teaching her in terms of cultivation. Stomp. Hannah jumped sideways and threw a dull dagger towards May. However, May did not even block the dagger but dodged it just by looking at the side of her eyes. It was unexpected that the timid Hannah was an expert at throwing daggers. She was not exactly an expert in terms of combat, but her dagger throwing skills were top-notch. She could even hit a target with a kitchen knife a dozen meters away without missing. As it appeared to be, Hannah only fell into the hands of the raiders due to being outnumbered and having bad luck. As May dodged the dagger, Feng Zhiro and Colleen made their moves. Colleen, using a makeshift claw on her hands, swiped towards May's head. Feng Zhiro, on the other hand, aimed for May's legs. The movements of the two were fast. A regular human would have a hard time following them. After all, one was a powerful mutator, while the other was a moderately leveled Chinese cultivator. A bit later than the two, Alana, with her hands covered with gauntlets, punched towards May's stomach. With a 3-pronged attack like this, it would be hard to dodge or block. However, May, with her eyes dilated, stabbed her sword to the ground and blocked Feng Zhiro's attack. She then used the sword as a balance to position herself horizontally, avoiding Colleen's attack. Lastly, in that position, she kicked Alana's gauntlet, not only blocking the punch but also pushing herself out of the encirclement of the 3. It just happened in an instant. But May was already outside the range of the 3. Geez. I hate this. Colleen grumbled with a sigh as she looked at May. Close combat with you having those eyes is just unfair. Alana could only shrug. Feng Zhiro, who could barely understand what Colleen said, also agreed. Hannah did not say anything, but she seemed to be in the same opinion. Well, May's eyes could not only zoom but could also make everything in her sight seem slower. However, while the other four seemed amazed, May seemed disappointed. This won't do. May shook her head. What is wrong? I think you did well. Alana, who trained in some martial arts, thought May did well avoiding the attacks and escaping the encirclement. I think I could have done some sort of counterattack at the same time, but all I managed to do was to dodge and block, May replied. I got overwhelmed with 4 attacks coming almost at the same time and could not think properly. Seriously. You're quite the Spartan to yourself, aren't you? Colleen grumbled. No. May shook her head. I have to improve more if I wanted to continue fighting by Gerger's side. Hearing the reason, the other 4 could only shrug. Of course, the only reason May wanted to improve her abilities was Mark. Day 172 to 2:14 p.m. Night Everett Pure Spirit Tree Subdimension, Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. Another 3 days passed. Mark's research was progressing smoothly. Since yesterday, he moved his working area inside Chio's subdimension. It was due to various reasons, although for the most part was because the 5-meter-tall golem would not fit inside his workshop. If Mark just needed it for a work reference, he did not need to work in front of the broken golem. He could perfectly recall everything he already saw and observed from his subconscious. However, it was not what Mark needed the broken golem for at this moment. How is it? Mark asked as he touched the golem's arm with his right hand and a glowing diagram on a table with his left. In front of Mark, it was Annika and Barak. They were his assistants for his work since yesterday. After breaking more than half of the magical equipment his group brought back from the Kingdom of Black Duendes, Mark was confident that he collected enough magical energy conductor to make 3 small golems or 1 human-sized one. The only thing Mark needed to do was figure out the functions of the magic circuits and how these things work in technical ways in particular. In that case, one of the things that Mark needed to know was the flow of magical energy within these magic circuits. And the best people to get help from, in this case, was the 2 people in front of Mark. Annika was recognized in the base as its animal tamer and animal handler. However, only a few knew that her eyes could see more than a regular human or even a mutator could. As her eyes could see energy as colors, she would be able to see the energy flow within the magic circuits without problems. As for Barak, he was here due to his familiarity with magic formations, also known as magic circles. He might not be a fully established magic user since he was a summoner, but, in the least, he was the most familiar with these kinds of things here in the base. Mark also tried asking Terramilio and other magical races in his base if they had familiarity with magic circles and stuff. Unfortunately, none of them had a positive answer. In the first place, magical races could use magic naturally. They had no reason to rely too much on magic circles. However, it seemed that some of them knew some ritual magic, in the least. Nonetheless, ritual magic had nothing to do with Mark's current research. Mark also wanted to hear the details about this stuff, but definitely not now. At Mark's question, Annika was concentrating on both the arm of the golem and the small replica on the table. As Mark poured magical energy into both mediums, Annika carefully observed the flow. The energy flow looks identical, but the consistency of the flow in the replica is unstable, Annika said and pointed at a certain part of the replica. Right here. The flow weakens. It doesn't get cut off or scatter. Mark asked. No. Annika shook her head. It just weakens from this part, but the rest looks the same. Then, it's good, Mark said as he stopped pouring magical energy on both items. The consistency can be fixed later on. The most important thing right now is if the flow is correct. I guess that's true. Annika agreed. But this is better than yesterday. The flow yesterday goes either backward or scatters out of the medium. This was the second day that they were testing the magic circuits that Mark replicated. And the results yesterday. It was bad. Mark's first attempts in recreating the magic circuits that he copied from the golem's body, and the documents went wrong in one way or another. Like what Mark had mentioned, some circuits got the energy flow cut off while some scattered out of the circuit, causing disrupting the flow heavily. One of the reasons was either the circuit in the golem being damaged because of its age. There were also errors within the diagrams in the documents. And that was where Barrick's duty here started. Using his knowledge about the complex symbols of magic circles, he would try to draft replacements on the broken parts of the non-functioning magic circuits. From the cooperation of the three, they managed to fix and recreate some of the magic circuits successfully. Well, of course, not everything. Barrick's knowledge was not enough. The magic circuits used in the golem and the documents were also old enough to be called lost knowledge. That was why there were some of the circuits that had no success yet. After testing and succeeding in recreating the replicas, the next part was determining the magic circuit's specific function. Each part of the golem had different circuits interconnected with each other. It was not wrong to say that the golem's circuitry was as complicated as the motherboard of a computer. For the golem to function correctly, each specific magic circuit had to be in the proper places. It was a hard endeavor if one had no experience in electronics or programming. Fortunately, Mark had experience in both. He was a computer science graduate. As such, Mark studied several programming languages. Although he did not learn anything useful in college, in the least, he could follow the programming language and syntax as a reference. As for electronics, Mark had basic knowledge. He had to learn it to make some props he created as a living to function properly. It was an unexpected but really good thing that he could make use of this knowledge with studying and building a golem. Bro, this is a new one, right? Annika said as they tested another magic circuit. The energy gets cut off in half. There is no energy flowing on the other. I thought so too when I'm making it, Mark said. As the energy stopping at this point. Mark then pointed at a certain part of the circuit. He then put his other hand on another part of the circuit. How about now? Mark asked. Ooh, Annika said, amazed. The whole thing is glowing now. Knew it. Mark nodded as he let go of the circuit. This one needed two inputs at the same time to function. Mark then looked at another circuit. This one also has two inputs. But one input is just enough to light the whole thing. Mark mentioned. It's like logic gates. Finishing the test on another circuit, Annika looked at the broken golem. Do these things really make this golem move? It's hard to find the logic. How can just combinations of lines and symbols be able to move this thing? From the perspective of a regular modern human, magic won't really make any sense. Barrick chimed in. But think about it. Most humans don't know how technology works. They just knew that it works, and accept the fact without question. Annika fell silent, looking at Barrick with eyes annoyed by his words. Don't look at me like that, little girl. I'm telling the truth. Barrick reacted, having the same annoyed expression. The two were now the animal handlers of the base. Annika for the mutated animals, and Barrick for the magical creatures. Thus, it was already expected for the two to work together. However, with Barrick's straightforward nature being relentless with his words and Annika being a somewhat annoying energetic girl, the personality of the two did not really match each other as a team. There was no need to mention that Barrick was an old-school middle-aged man while Annika was a modernized teenager. The two really would not mix well. Thus, the two would always end up getting annoyed with each other. It was not to the extent of being impossible to cooperate, but the two better work separately than working together. You two should stop quarreling in front of me. Mark sighed. If you two don't behave, I'll make sure to make you two as a team from now on. No. The two exclaimed at the same time. Then behave, Mark warned. I don't want my work to be hindered because you two keep quarreling. And at Mark's words, the two looked at each other one last time and just stopped interacting. There was really no need to, as they only needed to respond to Mark's orders and questions. Because of the two concentrating on the work, it became faster. It seemed that the two really did not want to be lumped together, despite both Barak and Annika having talent and skills with animals. In any case, there was really no need for the two to be forced to work together. Both mutated animals and magical creatures might be considered as animals. But the two kinds were still extremely different in nature. The taming procedure and even the way to care for them were also different. Thus, even both kinds of animals needed to be put in separate places. And in terms of value, both Barak and Annika had pros and cons. Annika could transfer her contract with animals with other people. Thus, anyone who wanted and could care for an animal helper could benefit from it. In this case, Barak lost as only he could make use of the creatures he tamed. However, Barak could call upon his tamed animals anywhere, anytime. It was something that Annika could not do, of course. Thus, in terms of fighting capability and utility, Barak won. If the two could only work together, it would be better. However, there was no need to force the two as it would only impact things negatively. As the quarreling stopped, Mark's study of the golem progressed further. From what they found out, there seemed to be three kinds of magic circuits within the golem. One was to relay commands from the core. The other was to transfer the commands. And lastly, the circuits that execute the function of a certain part. Looking at it, the magic circuits were installed following a certain syntax. It was really similar to programming. And with the knowledge they acquired today, Mark was sure that he would be able to start making prototype golem parts in the next few days. Say, big brother, Annika called out. Are you really making something like this? Annika was currently looking at the broken golem. She was thinking that Mark was going to make an exact copy of this giant piece of metal. Definitely not. Mark bluntly replied. Why not? Annika asked. Won't it be easier to just copy this thing? Since you are steadily figuring out how these circuits work, isn't it just fine to make a copy or just replace the broken parts? And in this thought, Barak also seemed to agree. I think making a new golem would be really hard. From what I learned from my master, crafted golems like this are really rare because of the difficulty to build one. Mark looked at the golem. Both Annika and Barak had a point here. However, Mark never intended to fix or make a similar one to this broken golem. I'm making a new one because this thing is extremely outdated. Mark sighed. I already checked the insides of the golem. While the mechanisms inside the golem are state-of-the-art in the past, it's nothing but antique compared to similar mechanisms made with modern technology. So, I'm making a golem powered by magic circuits and had modern mechanisms. That way, the result won't be some clunky piece of metal that can barely move. Barak and Annika fell silent. They could not fathom how Mark could think of such things. However, what he said did make sense. Golems portrayed in literature and any other media were large, clunky, and slow-moving. But why was that the case? Remember the settings of such pieces of entertainment. It was either the era of gods or a fantasy world. Both had low technological advancements, and the golems were either made of magic or the old technology they had. However, there was one thing identical to golems in more futuristic settings. That was right. Robots. And what Mark was aiming for was the fusion of a high-tech robot and a crafted golem. But what was the main reason for Mark to attempt such an ingenious but almost impossible idea? Well, it was the mechas. From what Mark knew, mechas could take over and other hack robots. Well, robots made with modern and future technology in the least. If Mark used a magical system of a golem and the mechanical parts of robots, then he would be able to create something that was as strong as the mechas but immune to their hacking. Day 174 to 10:21 a.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Quezon. Another 2 days passed. It was almost 2 weeks since the second wave of the apocalypse happened. Another 3 days, and it would mark the end of the second week. With the barrier only expected to last for a whole month, it was no surprise that it began to show signs of weakening. After all, it nearly passed half of its lifespan. Time was running out. Fortunately, There were no encounters of either infected or mechids around the base. It made everyone able to concentrate on things they were supposed to do. Mark focused on his research together with Annika and Barrick. The fighters were receiving combat training. The farmers were already amidst restoring the farm fields. And, of course, the workers. They also had things to do. And to say, it was the most important one. The base was surrounded by black, fortified, sturdy walls made of blood metal. However, it was literally the only protective wall the mountain base had. Although it was extremely sturdy, there was no guarantee that it would not fall in the future. Thus, the plan to make an outer wall commenced. The outer wall would surround 3/4 of the cleared area around the base, still inside the barrier. Building the outer walls around that distance was not that practical in everyone's thought. After all, it would cut 1/4 of the farmland and clear areas around the base. It meant that there would be less land for farming. However, it also allowed expanding the base and building outside the existing wall, which would become the inner wall in the future. In the first place, the farming areas were only located on the northern side. While the west side was a cliff behind Mark's house, the remaining east and south sides almost had nothing on it. After the outer wall was built, the east and south cleared areas would become secure to build more structures and necessary facilities. Of course, the dwellings and supply warehouses would remain inside the inner walls for safety. Nonetheless, the new wall was unlike the currently built walls. It was not planned for the new one to be made entirely of blood metal. In the first place, while blood metal was an extremely sturdy material, it was not the only reason the wall and structures in the base were built with it. Blood metal was easy to shape as Mark and the blood children could make it in any shape they could. The source of blood metal, of course, blood, was also renewable. Furthermore, Mark's group had no way of bringing concrete or heavy types of machinery to build walls up the mountain in the past. Thus, the only materials they could use at that time were either blood metal or wood. Of course, the choice was clear between the two. Still, blood metal was not the easiest thing to work with. Building walls with it would take time and a large amount of blood. Even the current walls took almost a month to build. The area inside the walls was not too large either. The current land area inside the walls of the mountain base was not too different from the land area of the Philippine General Hospital. Yes, it was quite large. But not large enough for every facility they needed. And if they wanted to build a new wall that was much wider than the first one, not only would it take more time and blood, but they might not make it before the barrier went down. Fortunately, they had more options now. The lead of the current building project was no other than Lewis Morgan. Using his geomanipulation, building sturdy walls made of stone would be a piece of cake. It was impossible to surround the whole base with the wall in one go with Lawya's current level and amount of psych energy. But in the least, finishing the walls before the barrier vanished was more than plausible. And using blood metal as the foundation and supports for the walls that Lewis would build would be far sturdier than just regular stone or concrete walls. With the new plans for the base in play, the workers were busy preparing the locations where they would build the walls. Everyone was busy with work and preparations. Still, it was not hard to notice how peaceful the past few days were. It was too peaceful that it was simply unnerving. It was almost 6 months since the end of the world began. While not everyone was used to it, they were now familiar with the chaotic life of the apocalypse. The peace they had now was just too good to be true after all the horrendous things they experienced. Sometimes, it was good to see that something was happening in their front than getting nervous about things that could possibly happen. But as if trying to prove the uneasiness in their minds, something happened this day. Everyone paused from their work and gazed at the sky. Without waiting for anyone to order them, the workers and farmers hurriedly retreated back inside the wall. It was already their protocol to do so in case any of them discovered any possible danger. It was the course of action if the Tikbalangs, the Dryad, or even Huey failed to detect it before them. At the same time, Mark and the others would be informed what was happening while the guards on the lookout would prepare to intercept. At the time that the workers spotted the potential danger, Mark and Huey were already alerted. Huey could hear the voices of the people retreating while Mark could detect their emotional fluctuations. Furthermore, Chio was here to tell Mark that something was going on. Mark was currently inside his workshop with Annika and Barrick. They were in the middle of recreating some other circuits to try out later. Then, without any warning, Mark turned into a surge of black mist that soared out of his workshop. Annika and Barrick were surprised and chased after him. There was only one thing that could make Mark behave like this. It meant that there could be a sudden danger that appeared. And Mark rushed out to deal with the situation. In no time, Mark was already above the highest point of Chio's branches and leaves. For the possible danger to be undetected by the Tikbalangs and the Dryad, it only meant it was in the sky. That was what Chio also told him. And as Mark flapped his wings, Mark saw it. Flying at the same altitude as a jet fighter, it would be a bit hard to spot. However, with its size, it was no wonder that the workers saw it. Mark stared at it. It seemed to be a floating, gigantic cube. Seeing something like this that appeared to be out of the extraterrestrial, it was no surprise for everyone to suspect that it had something to do with mechans. Whoosh. At this time, a flash of light appeared beside Mark. Gerger. Is it an enemy? It was May who arrived by Mark's side. She already had the shooting moon blade on her hands, ready to fight any threat that came. Mark could only frown as he stared at the floating cube. After all, it might be a dangerous situation. He already saw a mechanical shark shooting lasers. It would not be surprising if something this big was capable of that or even something stronger. Just stay on standby. Don't go out of the barrier. Mark said to May. I'll give you a signal if you need to shoot. Prepare a converter for the first shot. Okay. May solemnly nodded. And there, Mark soared towards the sky. As he exited the barrier, he covered his body with miasma, protecting him from the radiation in the surroundings. Mark carefully flew towards the cube. An enemy like this could damage the base. That was why if he wanted to lure it away first. It did not take Mark too long to notice, but the cube was descending in his direction. It seemed to be also trying to approach him. This was odd. If it was a mechad, it would definitely try to attack Mark from afar. Maybe it had no long-ranged attacks. Thus, Mark continued to fly upward, tightening his guards up the closer he got. But then, at some point, Mark paused. The floating cube entered Mark's detection range. And immediately, Mark's caution dissipated. He could not help but also release a sigh of relief. While he watched the cube descend, Mark tapped on the ring he received from Bathala. The pair of the ring that was on May would receive the message he wanted to tell. Below, May received the message through the ring. She lowered her gun and flew down. On the ground, the fighters were already gathering. Of course, it would be hard for them to deal with a flying opponent. Nonetheless, they still readied for battle. They were all looking up the sky, watching Mark and the gigantic floating cube. Mistress, how is it? Odalina immediately inquired as she saw May fly down. And to everyone's surprise, May replied. It's a false alarm. Everyone can go back to their duties. May, are you sure? Alana asked. That huge cube is still there. I'm sure, May answered. Gerger said that the guests we were expecting finally arrived. Guests, you say? Alana was speechless as she turned her eyes back to the floating cube in the sky. It was just in time to see Mark actually enter the strange thing. Mark and the cube were now close to each other. It was truly large, about the size of a bungalow. As the floating cube stopped in front of Mark, a door actually opened. Mark could tell that the two people inside wanted him to come in. Mark did what the visitors wanted and entered. The door immediately closed, showing the wariness towards the radiation in the environment. After entering, Mark went through a security hatch and entered the main hallway. There, a person stood, waiting for him. Hey, long time no see. It was Ilya, the succubus that Mark and May met in New Jersey. She was as seductive looking as ever. Not like Mark would care about her, though. Before Mark could open his mouth, Ilya spoke. Master is waiting for you. Sorry, he can't greet you here since he's operating this huge thing. Lead the way then, Mark said, and Ilya gestured to follow him. Following behind the succubus, Mark took time to scan the surroundings. Unexpectedly, while it looked like nothing but a floating cube inside, it actually appeared to be some sort of flying vessel. Curious about this, what do modern people call this again? Ah, spaceship, is it right? Can this thing fly into space? Mark suddenly asked, making Ilya a bit awkward. I think so. Ilya answered with an uncertain expression. I mean, it can enter the deep waters of the sea without problems, so I think space would be plausible. Although I don't think we can ride it to space since it doesn't have any function to generate air in space. It's technically a spaceship, then. Mark said with interest. Although Ilya was uncertain because of the function she said that was lacking, a rocket ship that humans built did not have such functions either. Generating oxygen in space with the current level of Earth's technology was impossible, after all. Since the ship was not extremely large in the interior, Mark and Ilya reached the room, which appeared to be the deck, in no time. There, a man stood in front of the control panel. He looked behind as he sensed the arrival of the two. We finally found you. The man, Chemetris said, as he saw Mark. We had to spend some time searching for you. Mark stared at Chemetris for a bit. The humanoid chimera actually looked like a human at this moment. His monstrous features and body parts were nowhere to be seen. Even his face was different from before. If not for Mark sensing the mental fluctuations from Chemetris and the presence of Ilya, he would think that it was a different person. And at the words of Chemetris, Mark was confused. Didn't you give me this to locate me? Mark took out the golden feather from his spatial ring. Now we know the problem. Ilya said with dismay as she looked at Mark. What's wrong? Mark asked. Master can't detect the feather when he tried to. We knew that you won't die easily, so we thought that it was broken or lost. No wonder Master can't find it. It's inside a subspace. Ah. Mark understood what happened and could not help but feel a bit apologetic. However, you guys never told me that I should keep it outside, either. You two just left immediately back then. Silence enveloped the deck. Awkwardness then filled it as the floating cube landed outside the mountain base. Day 174 to 10:38 a.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabido, General Nakar, Province of Quezon. The appearance of the floating cube in the sky sure caused a commotion in the mountain base. With the Mechads arriving on Earth from space, something that resembled an unidentified flying object could cause an uproar among the populace. However, that commotion turned into a surge of curiosity. It was Mark's base, after all, where his words were trusted more than other things. Knowing that the ones that arrived were not enemies, they could not help but become interested in that gigantic floating object. As the floating cube landed, many of the people of the base were around to take a look. Of course, they did not swarm towards the cube. In the first place, the people could only look from above the walls as the cube landed outside. Mark went out of the cube as it landed. He was followed by two rather good-looking people. Especially the woman. She was gorgeous. As the woman went out, however, someone began to release killing intent. Of course, Mark immediately detected that and could only shrug as the owner of the intent retreated away. Seems like someone is unhappy with me. Not really surprising. Ilya coquettishly said. A succubus like her would definitely sense that ill intent towards her. However, she did not know who the ill intent was coming from. Furthermore, when she was living, posing as a human in America, she had always been the target of jealousy from other women because of her natural charm and seductive body. This one is entirely your fault. Mark said, giving the confused Ilya a bad sigh. Me? Ilya asked. Follow me. Mark ignored Ilya's question and told the two to follow. As Mark did not answer, Ilya could only look at Chemetris, who nodded and followed Mark. Following Mark, Chemetris and Ilya entered the mountain base for the first time. Behind the gate were the core members of the base, with May, Odalina, and Huey at the front. Ooh, long time no see, Ilya exclaimed, seeing May. Of course, Ilya's enthusiasm in meeting May once again was met with a silent stare. After all, they were not close with each other at all since they only met once. Furthermore, that meeting was not exactly in good light. How cold. Ilya sulked and pouted. Her seductive appearance sure affected the male audience. Stop playing around. Chemetris scolded Ilya. It seemed that even Chemetris was irked by her behavior. Oh, okay. Master, Ilya said as she grabbed Chemetris's arm. Chemetris did not give any reaction to that and just allowed her to do so. The men around, however, seemed displeased as they decided to go back to work. Seeing some of the people leave, Mark turned to the remaining people. You all should go back to your duties. We only have around 2 weeks left before the barrier vanishes. There is no time to slack around. Mark said, which everyone obeyed. The only ones left were Odalina and May, who would definitely go with Mark to the Cliff House. The group led the 2 guests to the Cliff House. It was the best place to welcome guests, after all. As they walked towards their destination, both Chemetris and Ilya could not help but look around. There were a whole lot of interesting things around the base that was definitely unique to this place. Your place looks unique, Ilya said to Mark, staring at the night-evered spirit tree that covered more than half of the base. On the other hand, while Chemetris had the same thought, he did not say anything. Soon, they arrived in front of the Cliff House. Both Ilya and Chemetris could not help but look up because of the rather weird house they were brought to. It was, after all, a house that was made on a literal face of a small cliff. Well, the back of the house was an unclimbable cliff. The house would look even more strange if they saw it. Odal, give them something to drink, Mark said to Odalina as they arrived at the living room. He then turned to the 2. Have a seat. Although I'll have you 2 wait for a bit. I need to change clothes. Okay. Ilya answered, and Chemetris nodded. The 2 then took a seat on the sofa, and Odalina asked them what drinks they would want. As for Mark, he left with May towards the bedroom. Mark did need to change clothes for a reason. As the commotion began without warning, Mark was still in his work clothing when he spread out his wings and flew off. Although not ripped entirely, his shirt had 3 pairs of holes on the back. It was not something comfortable to leave alone at all. It did not take long, and Mark returned, sitting down with the 2. Where's your wife? Ilya immediately asked, noticing that May did not return with Mark. She had other things to do, Mark replied and immediately shifted the topic. Anyway, I don't think that you 2 only arrived now because you can't detect the feather, right? Did finding your creator's laboratory take too long? It was a good question from Mark. Considering the very long time that Chemetris was sealed, it would not be surprising if they did not find the laboratory. The geographical changes from that time and now were tremendous, after all. However, considering that Chemetris managed to change his face, it looked like that they did find it. They even had that flying vessel. It didn't take us too long, Chemetris replied, shaking his head. Using the clues we had, we managed to find the general location. Although it took some effort to find the exact location. Chemetris and Ilya then began to explain to Mark what happened. Apparently, they only spent about 4 days searching for Mark's whereabouts. It was not easy considering the drastic change on Earth. There was no one to blame about it, however. Still, for Chemetris and Ilya, 4 days were not that long. What made Mark frown was the reason for the delay in Chemetris and Ilya's arrival. Chemetris did not hide the findings they learned after reaching the laboratory, especially the creation of another humanoid chimera. A humanoid chimera, similar to Chemetris, yet the complete opposite. Chemetris was created to be something that could face against gods and live. And it was a success, considering that Chemetris could not be killed by the gods, and they could not do anything but seal him instead. However, even though Chemethris had a semi-immortal body, he lacked the prowess to kill a god. His attacks and abilities were powerful. But what it could do was deal damage to them but not enough to kill. On the other hand, the other, humanoid chimera, created was designed with nothing but destruction in mind. It was a creature capable of breaking a wall that even gods were not able to. However, it also came with a cost. The creator was not able to control it and died in its hands. The two also explained the circumstances of the laboratory. It was already lost in the bottom of the ocean, and the flying vessel they were using was a part of it used for emergencies. What we had been doing in the past month was to search the traces of Master's younger sibling. Ilya explained. It was not wrong to say that the other, humanoid chimera, was the younger brother of Chemethris. They had the same creator, who was, in a way, their father. But what are you two going to do if you found it? Mark asked. Kill him, of course. Ilya declared without hesitation. The creator seemed to have done something with that sibling of mine, Chemethris spoke. It seemed that he was made incomplete. By the creator's personality, it is done with only one thing in mind. He likely intended for my sibling to consume me to become a complete being. Mark stared at Chemethris, a bit speechless. It looked like his creator was a total madman. But you are sealed, and that did not happen. Mark said. Yes, fortunately, Chemethris agreed. However, we don't know whether my sibling is dead or where he vanished to. We tried to follow some leads that were left by the part of the consciousness of the creator, but we soon reached a dead end. Furthermore, the world suddenly changed too much. All the remaining leads we had vanished. Ilya added. And what pushed the two to finally find Mark? Without any leads left to follow, it was better to give up for now and focus on other things. What are your plans? Mark inquired. Both Chemethris and Ilya looked at each other for a second and nodded. They then faced Mark. Is your offer last time still available? Ilya asked. About staying in my place. Mark replied back. Yes. Ilya nodded. If it's possible, we want to stay here. We really had no place to go now. Of course, we will contribute to the base. That's not a problem. But I think that's not all, right? Mark sure would not decline. Having someone as powerful as Chemethris in the base would bolster its safety. And even if the Great One came back to cause more trouble, what happened in the past would never repeat itself. But, of course, there would be a catch, now. Yes, Chemethris answered. We want your help in case that my sibling re-emerged. Which hopefully won't happen. It was a gamble. If that sibling of Chemethris was still alive, it could implicate the base. Mark fell silent. He was racking his brains for all the knowledge he had about myths and legends. However, he never came across anything that might possibly lead to that humanoid chimera. In the least, the tree where Chemethris was sealed had some eerie background to it. As for something similar, there were many. However, none of them seemed to have any resemblance to something like a destructive humanoid chimera. Thus, this gamble was rather hard to win. But, in the least, it would benefit the base in the long run. I agree. Mark accepted the two. However, but I need some help from you too, Chemethris. Mark said, looking straight at the humanoid chimera in front of him. Can we hear what it is first? Ilya asked as Chemethris would likely agree to it without asking. At that question, Mark told them the circumstances, especially the enemies that they might need to deal with in the future. The most urgent one was Sinogo, who became a gigantic, mutated infected crocodile with godly powers. Damn. Ilya voiced out. You're making enemies with deities, huh? Mark looked at Ilya, annoyed. They are the ones making enemies with me. Those words were not wrong. Mark was not the one to cause trouble first but them. Ilya thought about it and turned to Chemethris. I guess we won't have any problem with it, right? Master. And to Ilya's words, Chemethris nodded. They are just deities. Chemethris said in a non-caring tone. It might sound arrogant. But to Chemethris that fought with gods thousands of years ago, deities were definitely nothing. If you two agree, then welcome to my base. Mark said with a lightened tone. It was rare for Mark to show courtesy, but these two would be helpful allies for a very long time. Mark then scratched his head. Looks like we need to prepare a dwelling for you two. There is no need for that, Chemetris interjected. We can live in our transportation vessel. You sure? Mark asked. It only had a few rooms, but it is spacious enough for a small group of people. And there are only the two of us, me and Ilya. If there is something we need, it is likely a place where the vessel could land and would not disturb people. I see. Mark nodded. If you say so. And there, Mark gained two new people for the base. They might become the source of trouble in the future, especially Ilya, in many ways. However, their value and strength were more than enough to make up for the trouble. Not to mention a flying vessel and some of the research that the creator had in the past. Both these things would bring great benefit to the base, considering that the world was going back to the same state as it was in the lost history, the era of gods.